The least
biased person on this call by a lot is me. Like, there's no.
Yeah.
All right, everybody, we are live. As you can tell already, this group is going to have a really fun conversation today. We're excited to be with you all, and we'll give it a minute here to let the audience gather, grab your lunch, sit down with us. We are chatting all things CRM and nonprofits, data culture, the human stack, a bunch of really good, interesting stuff. For starters, my name is Mitch Stein. I'm the CEO and co-founder at Pond. We host these webinars every single week, every Thursday at noon Eastern, 9 a.m. Pacific. You'll find us here chatting about all the most important topics around the nonprofit sector. Pond is a marketplace between nonprofits and all kinds of vendors that they utilize, consultants, software, training, and you build credits by engaging in the community and attending things like this webinar. So be sure at the end of the session, you let us know you were here, fill out our quick survey, and you will get $50 into your Pond account. So it couldn't be easier. Without further ado, you're not here today to hear me. You're here today to hear from these three amazing experts we've brought together. So I'm really excited for them to introduce themselves and help us get the conversation going. I'll just ask everyone to share, who you are, what you do, and a few layers of your identity that are most important to you. So Najeet, do you want to kick us off?
Good morning on the West Coast. Good afternoon to all of you on the other side of the country. My name is Najeet Kassam. I am the CEO of a company that builds CRM for a living called Kila. I'm sure many of you have heard of it. I'm super proud to lead an incredibly diverse group of women and men building powerful, engaging technology for every nonprofit. I promise today that I won't be selling, although it'll hold back it'll take all the restraint in the world. No, I kid. A bit about my identity. The most important part of my identity is definitely being a father and a husband. I have a beautiful 2-year-old. He's a ball of rambunctious mischief, and a wonderful wife. I'm a former corporate lawyer, and I've just crossed the 33-year mark of working in the nonprofit sector. So I've had a lot of experience and a lot of deep passion for the space, really stemming from my family's tough generational history to getting to North America, but really feel it's important to give back. So a little bit about my identity and about what I do. Thanks, Mitch.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Najeet. Emily, would you like to go next?
Sure. Hey, I'm Emily. So I've been working in nonprofit since about 2011, when I sort of snuck my way into a data and operations job at a major large nonprofit, which I said, I had a great hiring manager. I said, I don't have any experience to show for this that much, but I really want to learn it and I'll do my best, and I have a passion for it. And so did all my learning sort of on the job, I guess what we used to call sort of an accidental admin or accidental techie. And about 2.5 years ago, I got to the point of having a full-time role in nonprofit and a side hustle of working with many nonprofits on data and tech culture stuff, and had to make the choice and went with running my own company called Make Tech Work for You, because I just want it to stop working other people over and know that humans can make tech work for them, no matter what background they come from. And some other layers of my identity. I am sitting in the Bronx on Wappinger and Lenape land, but I really love it here. And I have 2 young kids. And something that really helps me with working on data and tech envisionment is the work that I put into the sports that I am involved in. So I'm an avid snowboarder. I've become an avid skateboarder. I really like board sports and getting into rock climbing now. And though having goals and vision for what I want to accomplish there has been one of the greatest factors in teaching me how to do that skill for data and tech. And I think we can all use our unique individual backgrounds and point those towards data and tech to be successful.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Emily. Tim, you want to bring it home?
Hey, everybody. Thanks for being here today. And Mitch, thanks for inviting me. It's great to be on a panel with friends of mine. My name's Tim Lockey. I usually call in from Bozeman, Montana. Today I'm on the West Coast, so it's great to be out and traveling again. I've been working with nonprofits since I was 18, which which is almost 30 years ago now, which is a long time. So I've been very involved in nonprofits. In 2010, I really veered into tech for nonprofits. And in 2019, I veered into the human stack and trying to figure out what does it look like to equalize the amount of attention that's spent on evolving the humans as we do on evolving the tech. And so that's really been my passion / obsession / albatross for the last few years, and something I'm deeply passionate about, whether I want to be or not. There's days where I'm just like, can I just go back to the tech? But I would say when you're asking about identity, that has led me to just really think about the core identity for all of us probably is human. And that's really important to me. I'm a really privileged human. I've spent the last few years really getting in touch with what that means, what that looks like. And that's involved confronting a lot of the isms for me. So some homophobia and some sexism and all of that, and just really looking deeply at what does that look like for me, and how do I activate my privilege on behalf of others. And I'm also a CEO, co-founder of a podcast called Why It Matters, CEO of a company called Now It Matters. I've had the privilege of working with so many amazing experts, amazing nonprofit leaders, and nonprofits in the space. And so it's a real pleasure to be here.
Amazing. Well, as everyone can see, we have a truly incredible lineup of experts here today. So I will reiterate, jump in the chat if you have questions, something you're struggling with, or an issue you're having. You've got them for the hour. So make sure you raise those questions, and we'll really be sure to get to all of them. I'd love to kick off and for a little bit of background on the topic of CRM itself, and just to orient everyone, like, why are we talking about this? What's all the fuss about nonprofit CRM? Why is it so important? Najeet, would you mind kicking that one off for us?
Yeah, sure. So I think we got to talk. Oh, I'm gonna sound like a history professor. We got to talk about the history of giving a little bit to get into this. He's laughing because he knows that I speak in these giant historical platitudes too frequently. But let's talk about how giving has been for the last 100 years. So basically, since the first World War, the Great War, the war our great grandparents, many of whom fought in, giving has essentially been the same. It's been done through churches and synagogues and temples and mosques. It's been done through community centers, and it's been done through institutions associated with things like, women and men who serve the army and supporting them with resources. Nonprofits have fundamentally stayed the same in many ways for 100 years. But over the course of those 100 years, the role that nonprofits play in society, the role that they play in our democracies, the role that they play in supporting those who need support the most, whether it's to counter biases like Tim spoke to, or those who don't have just a little bit enough food or shelter or whatever it might be, nonprofits play a really key role. But from the First World War, or just after in the 20s, giving was very personal. And so for a long time, giving was done on paper and pen. And so the way that the sector evolved was driven by these, as it should be, by the way, human fundraising relationships that were so personal to the fundraisers, right? Whether it was the minister at your church or the local community center leader who everybody knew because she or he was just there, like at the barbecues in the community. And so that the evolution of that giving kind of moved from people's heads, and if you were lucky, to paper and pen, and if you were lucky, to spreadsheets, or way back in the day. And then came the 80s, and in the 80s, the rise of the personal and business computer that didn't take up a room began. And so with that, folks, large nonprofits like the Salvation Army and hospitals, foundations, and those with then hundreds of millions, today billions of dollars in donation revenue, started to say, hey, wait, we can use these computer things to actually track our giving. And that's the beginning of the CRM revolution. And it started as for very privileged organizations who had massive software. And since about 1981 through to today, you've seen the rise of, custom built to on-prem, to cloud 2.0, to now cloud 3.0. And what's interesting in all of this, though, Mitch, is 35 to 40% of American nonprofits still use spreadsheets or paper and a pen. So while we've moved 100 years and technology has transformed where this little thing is more powerful than most of the computers in the early 2000s, fundraising has fundamentally stayed the same for too many organizations. It's because there's been this deep reliance on people's memories and paper and pen. And so CRMs, donor management tools, databases, whatever you want to call them, have become really a necessity for folks who want to create institutional capacity, decrease reliance on individual fundraisers, and ultimately allow organizations to operate more efficiently. Does any of that make sense?
Go ahead, Tim. I was just going to ask you.
What was the statistic? Oh, can you say the number of that are using spreadsheets still?
It's really hard to know, but the best guess that I have, it's the Urban Institute's data from like a few years ago, but it's 35 to 40% of American nonprofits still use spreadsheets or paper and pen. And what's crazy is when you're giving, there are still organizations who make receipts by hand. That is like a not inconsequential number. It's wild.
Yeah. Wow.
Tim, I know that, like you've worked across nonprofits and social enterprises or different types of companies. CRM is not a nonprofit specific tool. Can you kind of shed some light on like what is unique about the use of the CRM in nonprofits versus other settings you may be familiar with the term?
Yeah, absolutely. So CRM goes hand in hand with sales and support, but really it established its footing in the sales world. So it really was about customer relationship management. And honestly, I really wish that it were relationship management, but honestly, it really could be called custom pipeline management
or customer transaction management, which is heartbreaking.
Exactly. Yes. So true. And so I think the positive part of that is that there's a lot of crossover between what happens in especially major donor fundraising and even marketing, recurring kind of subscription models. So you can get parallels between what happens in the for-profit and nonprofit world. And, I'm sure, Mitch, you knew this was coming, but the underlying issue is not the technology. The underlying issue is actually the economies. In one economy, in for-profits, you're doing everything you can for as little as you can for as much as possible. And in the nonprofit space, that's inverted, where you do as much as you can for as little as possible. And you don't have the concept of price even. And so when you have those two different kind of economies, you're going to have a lot, but you share all the same words. You're going to have a lot of things that look like they cross over and then they don't. And so, I was just on the phone yesterday, and a lot of my background is in Salesforce, which is a very solid enterprise level platform in the for-profit space. And it's really had a hard time downgrading to the size of a lot of nonprofits. And I've been around for the movement of getting that to work. And yesterday I was on the phone talking with somebody about how you take all the concepts in the Salesforce ecosystem in the for-profit space and really start to reevaluate those for the nonprofit space. And it does it really effectively in a lot of ways, but there is a sizing issue is one thing that happens in there. And then also the way that organic fundraising and relationship building works, even though great sales are always about relationship building, that's always been the case. There just are differences in the way that you approach that when you don't have a price, for example. And so the list of differences between them are enormous, but I would say what underlies the difference that's hidden a lot of times is the actual economies that are different in the for-profit and nonprofit space.
And I'd add one thing around, I'm a lawyer, I have to talk about compliance for a minute. I think the compliance realities, the compliance necessities, the IRS to keep 501c3 status, the CRA in Canada to keep charitable status, do have idiosyncrasies. They may be minor and they can be accommodated in any software, but I think it's really important to note that does play a role. And lastly, I think the relationship with the purchase in giving is fundamentally different from the purchase in commerce, right? And so underlying kind of Tim's point, there are some market differences, but there are a lot of similarities too.
And Emily, I'd love to hear, like, now that we've established the differences, I think it's also very clear, at least from my experience hearing people looking for new things, that every
Did we lose Mitch?
Yes.
Sorry, I don't, my Wi-Fi.
Emily, you're still on mute.
Thank you. I was just gonna say Mitch is at an airport right now for everyone on the call. So we are grateful that you are able to get to us when you can, Mitch.
Can you hear me okay now?
I think so.
Awesome. Sorry about that. Emily, I was just asking, now that we've talked about the differences between CRM and nonprofit versus for-profit, I think one of the other differences I've seen is everyone I know in small business, startup, profit space, I do not hear the same level of complaint around their CRM, whereas almost every person I've ever met at a nonprofit doesn't like their CRM. And it seems, or it hasn't liked it in the past. And it seems like a very shared experience. Why are people so unhappy with nonprofit CRMs in general, in your opinion?
I can start by saying Tim's going to talk about the human stack. So we know that's coming. So Emily, why don't you first and talk about the tech? Just saying.
I think people experience dissatisfaction with technology often when their expectations aren't aligned and they are not working on the relationship and maybe not recognizing the relationship between humans and technology. And potentially when something is expressed as a dislike or a frustration with a technology, it's an easy way to put it. It's language that we have and we know, but we could also reframe some of those feelings to our frustration with our processes, the roles that we're holding, the time and opportunity that our jobs allow us to learn about data and technology and where we want our skills to be. So I don't know that I can, Najeet, speak to the tech part. Like, if you want to say things I'm frustrated, I personally experience some frustration when systems that I use don't have the reporting capabilities that I want. But then again, that pushed me to learn more technology skills to get my data out of my systems. So I think again, what I see as the some reasons why we see dissatisfaction or hurt feelings around data and tech is because the relationship is in peril, and it's again these like expectations that we think maybe a tech should work a certain way or how fast it should work or that it should comply to the process that we have written out on a piece of paper. But if that process isn't written out in the code of your system, then you're never going to hit that really nice sweet spot where you've hit that relationship milestone that you're understanding each other.
And we do actually, I joke because Tim's a good dear friend, but I do want to hear from him. One thing I think I can take responsibility for all the vendors in the space, not one or any of them. It's like, I think that the visceral hope for sales and marketing teams for nonprofit CRMs is to sell you the holy grail. But the truth is, no CRM is the holy grail. There are great CRMs, there are less great CRMs, and I'm not here on this call to tell you which those are. However, what I can tell you is the best CRM is the CRM you use every day in your work. And if it could be the Steph Curry of CRMs, but if you don't know how to get into the building and watch it or play with him, it doesn't matter. And so, which is a very nice parallel into what Tim's about to say.
But before I let Tim take soapbox, Najeet, I do have to ask one follow-up question, which is why are there like 200 different nonprofit CRMs?
Good question. Well, I'm one of the idiots that built a company for the other 199, and then I was like, I think there's one more. And I think it actually goes back to the history lesson, and that's like so many people. So firstly, it's a very fragmented industry. We don't do a good job in our space, and I speak now as a board member and an executive director, communicating with our peers. It's always about fundraising or programming. It's never about building, strengthening relationships and sharing best practices. For an industry that pretends not to be competitive, we're pretty damn competitive. That's the first one. And I mean that as nonprofits, not as tech vendors. The second one is because there's a lot of bad technology built for processes of the past. And I think this is really the crux of it. So many of the CRMs are solving the problems of the 1920s, right? In some glorified form. And because it's a giant market, nonprofits represent 5.6% of the US GDP. 200 is actually not bad for a multi-trillion-dollar economy. But the frustration from all those 200 is so many of them are solving the problems of our grandparents. But it's profitable and it's valuable and there's so many customers or potential customers that's an easy way to do. I think not enough technology providers have taken the hard choice to invest in the actual tech, to think about the problems that the sector is facing and is going to be facing over the next 5, 10, 20 years. And that's why it's like, oh, I'll build another one. And then people just default to what's easy as opposed to probably what's better.
Yeah, and I think part of where the competitiveness shows up in my observation, just from building Pond for the last 2 years, is things, and the fragmentation means that things are localized. And so, of course, you're more competitive with a local peer because you're competing for similar grant funding and major donors. Whereas if we had better infrastructure, like cross region and around the sector, I think there's a much better opportunity to see more of that collaboration.
I also think like boards are part of the problem too, because we are so race to the bottom. Like Tim said this about the for-profit sector. If one of my staff comes to me and says, I want to buy this piece of software, my first response is, what's the return on investment going to be? Right? Like if they want to spend $5,000 a year, $10,000 a year, or $50 a year on something, I'm like, how much X is that going to give me? And how is it going to be different from what I currently do, or we currently do rather? Those are, as a board member, I say stupidly, that's not the question I'm asking in board meetings. The culture of the space isn't invest for the future. It's find the cheapest thing that'll get the job done. That's not going to give you great results, no matter how much we try as vendors to do that, because it's a race to the bottom ultimately. Even for big orgs, that's not like it's, and I think doing what's comfortable, what people have done in the past, and finding the cheapest option to do what we want to do as opposed to the best option with the highest ROI is kind of fed into this sort of, I'm going to call it like negative cycle, not to be, super negative, but that's the way it feels. And that's what I hope folks like Emily and Tim are telling their clients. Folks like me and my competitors are actually trying to get out of the cycle and doing.
Yeah, and I think what we're pointing to is like there's a lot of interesting stuff discussed about the actual tech itself, but there's this like bigger underlying issue around the people, be it board level, the staff, the leadership. Tim, it's kind of an open-ended question, but like, what are the practices that you see contributing to people just saying that, oh, I don't like my tech, when that might not be the reason?
I mean, I think Emily alluded to this really well. In fact, I took this note down when you said this, Emily, that the tech is the safest thing to blame. And I don't think I mean, I feel like I've heard that before, but when you said that, I feel like, it's like every time I have a conversation with you, I'm like, oh, that's really relevant and important. And so I think I do feel like part of what is happened in the space is that there has not been a focus on methodology. And I'm not going to go deep into why I think methodology is so critical. But what I can say on it is the things that I look for as an implementer when I'm hiring staff and looking at staffing around that is that a methodology allows me to create a job description that other people recognize they have skills in. And without that going on in the service part of what's happening, you can't actually do a conversion over into here is what this looks like for job descriptions that are anything besides tech. And so I know that's going a little bit meta, but I do think that until we have that kind of methodology, it will still always be safest to blame the technology, and there won't be something else to start looking at. So I think that that's one answer I would have
because
on that.
The other option is blame the people, and nobody wants to do that, right, Tim? Like, to be honest, and I'm not saying blame is like we need to blame, but that's the alter ego of the technology in that way, right?
Yep, I 100% concur on that. And the nature of the competition in this space is also different than for-profit space. In this space, the competition is around influence. Like the core capital is influence, not dollars, and money follows vision everywhere, but especially in the nonprofit space. And so I think that a lot of times what you're trying to do is compete on vision and influence, which is great. I actually don't think that that's a problem, but the nature of that kind of competition is really different, which means that as you're competing, you're not increasing your compensation related to that, which means a lot of times that what you advance in the ecosystem around as an individual is your ability to create influence, not your ability to create quality data and methodologies and these kinds of things. And so in the for-profit space, if you're not doing your job on a CRM and you're in sales, you are fired. And that's just not the way it works in the nonprofit space. I'm not suggesting everybody needs to get fired. That's not my point. My point is, like, we're focusing on rewarding something else. Before you say that, Najeet, I really want to hear from Emily on that same question, because I'm so curious what you would like, how you would answer.
The question of, can you rephrase the question?
Mitch, can you go? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it was really around what are the contributing factors to the complaints around technology that are about the technology. And I would extend that a little bit, just to say, and what can you start doing about it as a starting point, if you can acknowledge that.
Sorry, Emily, did you say are or are not, Mitch? Because it cut out for just a second. That are not about the technology is what you're asking, right?
Correct.
Okay, perfect.
Okay. Contributing factors to why the relationship between people working in mission-driven work and their technology is possibly in peril or strained and needs some relationship counseling. So one, I talked about recognizing that relationship, and some of that is this like anthropomorphizing of tech and being able to talk in those terms. But I think another part is recognizing our relationship to it in our work. And one, kind of common cliche phrase you might hear is like, I'm not a techie. That's not my job. Why should I, learn this or do this? And I think those are valid thoughts, especially in a time scarcity position that many people in nonprofit work find themselves in. So I think if we built in more of the structure and methodology around having people see the tech part of their role, the data tech part of their role, and how it can strengthen all of the rest of the impact that they're making from whatever it is they feel like is their core strength. It's community building or fundraising or program design. Those things can all be just enhanced with recognizing that part of your role is a data and tech component. And so that not having that, relationship established, I think, can really be a contributing factor to frustration with technology. Similarly, if your organization doesn't have a really established learning culture and the data and tech part of that, then you will, I think, hit frustration for many reasons, one of which just being that you won't necessarily feel that it's accessible to you to learn this stuff and that you're supported in it. But also it just can lead to a sense of complete overwhelm, especially if we're talking about CRMs specifically, because I think many of them, although Najeet, you can tell us your schedule, many CRMs, like many other techs, are on a release schedule. So it changes at a rapid pace. Your tech can change at a rapid pace. The tech ecosystem changes at a rapid pace, and your software does as well. So the not having the structure to keep up with that, with learning and development, can also, I think, lead to feelings of frustration.
Yeah, there's
So
something you mentioned that like actually resembles software, and the concept that when you invest in software, you can't think of that as your only cost. There's ongoing maintenance, and there's a mirror to that around people. Like as the technology develops, there's also ongoing maintenance of your people. It's not an upfront cost.
Well, and I think, Emily, you said something really quite relevant to conversations I've been having, and that's, and firstly, very well taken and brilliant point, because those investments, you almost have to like convince your team, your leadership, your board, whoever it might be, that that kind of investment, and it doesn't have to be tens of thousands of dollars. There are ways to do it in cost efficient and time efficient ways. But I was talking to a big leader of a leader of a big nonprofit, excuse me, and she said to me, "Remember when they said every company is going to be a tech or tech enabled company a few years ago? Like that was an adage that was sort of floating around amongst a lot of folks on LinkedIn and Twitter or whatever." She said, and this is a lady who's in her 60s, because she's not like, this is not a millennial who's beating the drum, excuse me. She said every nonprofit and every member of every nonprofit needs to think of themselves as tech enabled. And I was like, that's the stuff that I'm supposed to be saying, but I'm definitely going to steal that and pretend like it's mine, but it's not. And I think that sort of seems to be, Emily, at least what you're alluding to a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. That I think it's way bigger than nonprofit. I think that it is a life instance in the digital world, the time that we're in, and how the future is coming. That everyone should think of themselves as capable and confident in technology. If we zoom in on nonprofit, I'd like in our workspace, it helps make that less overwhelming to say, what do I need to know to do my work and do it better? And how can I be confident in those areas and grow that confidence? The I think the challenge is in the history. Gene, you're a history person, right? So the history is evolving, and we have to recognize, respect, and be on the journey with it, because there was a time period, I think, where I also heard nonprofits, like, we should not be tech companies. Stop developing proprietary technology and get Salesforce or get a CRM that will do that customization for you. And you can work with their open sourceness. And then I saw a shift, actually. I saw a shift after we went through a period of that where we went away from custom builds in-house. And now we're seeing, the place technology is in history now. There is a kind of tech control and knowledge that we want to have in-house. And we want to be able to have some of those skills and use things that are maybe a little bit more custom built. Even the way tech is built, right? Like the way that you customize some of your CRMs is almost proprietary technology building, as it was when we were hiring Python coders to make technology for us. So that historical shift, and as it continues to go, I think we want to keep the feelings that we had, recognize and honor the feelings we had around, like, we're not a tech company, we're a nonprofit. This is our mission. We shouldn't spend our time on developing proprietary tools, and shift into where we are now in the general technology landscape. To saying, actually, maybe we need to bring in a little bit of that. It doesn't have to be totally proprietary, but the idea of us having the ability to control and make our technology do what we want it to do is a core concept in our organization, that every person there should feel confident in the way they're doing it. You might not be coding those changes, but you have the absolute I want to say responsibility, because I really want people to feel like they own this tech, but the opportunity to raise your voice and say, I'd like it to be different. Can this tech be different for me? Here's how I'd like it to be different. And then the technologists on their side have the responsibility to see that through to whatever ends that is.
The interesting dichotomy, Emily, is that takes money. Call it what you want. It takes training money, to Mandy's point about learning the tech initially and learning the continual learning. It takes money in buying the right technology. It takes, and so it's and Catherine asked a really good question here. She said, how do we get boards or org leadership to change their mindset about CRM and bottom line? And I think what's incredibly important in all of this is tracking success and failure. There's got to be a culture of measurement that we bring in to our organizations. And so if you pitch Tim and say, Tim, I want to buy this new data science tool to build on top of my CRM, or I want to switch CRM, and I think it's going to do X, Y, and Z, then measure it. And so that's how you build trust amongst boards. It's going to take fighting and scrapping to get some of those initial investments. But when you do, and you measure, and then show the value, you're going to start to change the culture amongst your organization. And ultimately, I think it's going to be that does it, and enables us all to sell to our own leadership teams the value of it.
Yeah, I want to share. I don't know. I don't think I can comment, so I can't put a link in. But one of the seminal pieces of nonprofit literature that has driven that concept for me, Najeet, of performance management and measurement is Leap of Reason, Mario Marino and the Leap Ambassadors. The book's maybe a little dated even at this point, but it's a free book, and it's got awesome examples of where nonprofits have had incredible impact as a result of measurement and reflection, and sometimes change.
Yeah, and Emily, just to share with the audience, we'll grab those links and put them all in our recap summary. So we'll definitely include that for people. So thanks for sharing that.
I love the question, Catherine. Thank you for asking about mindset on boards. And one thing I think is important to say there. Well, I'm gonna have like 9 things to say here. Sorry, but one of them is really important to recognize. This is not funding. This is always vision. Like, money follows vision. So if you are having a problem with funding, it is because it doesn't attach to your vision in some way. And for boards and CRMs, a lot of times what's going on is that you have for-profit, successful business people on your boards who don't understand, again, the core economic difference here. And they're out of touch with what worked for their company in implementing a CRM and what a nonprofit is trying to do. And so, of course it worked for them. They had professionally developed people who knew that their jobs depended on it, A, and B, they had this thing called margin or profit that they could just like pull from to create the space to do it. And so, after implementing CRMs for nonprofits for 9 years, I took a step back and was like, I think that we are creating a huge amount of collateral, or of just this collision of people into the technology. And for digitally resilient people, it was great. But there's this whole other side for digitally resistant people who just never made that leap, and for whom it was really, they live in a lot of frustration around that, and boards don't see that side of it. And so I think that that's really important. And part of that comes back to understanding, without a framework of change that can help make that transition happen in the first place, your technology doesn't really stand a chance. And the reason I talk about the human stack so much is that just like the tech stack, there are constraints on the human stack. They're just emotional. And I think humans are rational. They have amazing processors, but they live behind this firewall of emotions. And if your emotion is resistant and you're introduced to a new CRM, it does, like, buy-in is not, whatever that means. And adoption is never going to work because you don't want to adopt it in the first place. And we do what we want, as humans. And so there's a lot there around just recognizing that in this space, which is different than the for-profit space, we have to pay much more attention to the way people feel about the technology, about their jobs, and about the fears related to them. Until you address those underlying emotions and actually incorporate them into, okay, how do we make that part of the process? The issue won't be the CRM. And I agree with Najeet, there are better and worse CRMs, but we have to start addressing the fear and the just the emotional tailwinds that follow are around us. And also, this is collaborative tech, so it's not like Facebook where you figure it out because you get this hit of dopamine every time. Like when you enter a donation, you don't get a hit of dopamine. Like that's just not what happens. And so we just have to start thinking about it more holistically.
And I think that starts with knowledge. Again, I'm going to go back to it, like things like data fluency. I mean, our sector should lead on data, not follow on data. And I can big up something that Tim's been working on really excitingly. Tim's the instructor for a certified data-driven fundraising course that I'm working on with him. And so, and Mitch, I'll happily share the link as well. But like every fundraiser, and I speak specifically to fundraisers, should be data fluent. They should regardless of their technical ability, because data is a currency of knowledge. And I think that's really, really exciting, because it also opens the door. It's almost like the precondition to all these conversations, to learning and engaging, to being comfortable with that, to advocating again. I don't want to say against your board, but advocating to your board for changes, for new ideas, for supporting the existing ideas. But if you can't speak the language, it's hard to articulate your thoughts. And if you can't measure its success, it's even harder to prove those things. So there's sort of a cascade of dominoes that have to begin, and it starts with a sector's culture and then an organization's individual processes, per what Emily kind of spoke a lot to.
Yeah, and Emily, it seems like, I mean, I know even in the chat, people are having like light bulb moments around this. And I know you do a lot of hands-on work, particularly with grassroots and smaller organizations. When you come across someone who is tech resistant or doesn't feel empowered by data, you can't just tell them to feel that way, right? There's a process. And I'd love to hear how you go about that, because I think people that get it can do more of that for their coworkers on their team as well.
Sure. It's totally driven from my own experience. So I think it'll connect with some and not with others. But when I came into nonprofit work, it was with a passion for impact and a little bit of piqued interest in data and technology from seeing how that worked in supply chain logistics and thinking, okay, let's see how it works over here in nonprofit. And it was a struggle, a real struggle for me for a while to get a click that made me say, oh, okay, I'm good at this. I can do this. And one of the things that was major in that click was changing from being technology first to being mindset first. And the mindsets that I had were partly driven by the values from the organization I was working in, and some other things that I saw people doing really well, like critical thinking and problem solving, the skills really that I saw my coworkers doing in their roles to make impact. I tried to find them in myself and point them towards data and tech. And once I did that, learning technical skill came so much faster. So as part of my history is I got the chance internally in my organization to try that out, to say, can I approach helping others learn the data and tech they need to do from this mindset first approach? And I saw that it seemed like people in mission-driven work who are really passionate about that and not necessarily passionate about technology, it clicked for them as well. They were having the same kind of light bulb moments that I was having, and their learning seemed to be faster and longer. They were holding on to it and driven more towards a kind of appreciation for it, actually. So the approach that I use is kind of a in-process approach called use, learn, love. And I just think, or learn, use, love, excuse me. I think we need to have the support and time for learning, right? Whatever the learning is within this, that you need to have the support and time for using your technology, and that there's this special factor more, this human factor, this love factor, that you have to find the thing that makes you appreciate it. And I think, Tim, your statement about the connection to mission is such a good inroads to there. And to bring it back to the board discussion, I think that ROI, I think that there's been a hesitancy in sometimes to answer the question, like, well, does your CRM feed people? Does your CRM like close the education gap? And you want to say, no, people do that, right? Our collective mission does that. Our work does that. But actually, you can draw that line. You really can say, actually, you know, and it doesn't even have to be a CRM. It can be going from paper to spreadsheets. You could say, because we went from paper to spreadsheets, we were able to handle delivering 10 more meals a month. And that's why we make the connection. That's why it's worthwhile to learn this. So the connection is, you know, what I'm hoping between learning, using, and loving your tech, that you're getting that connection to mission, and that you're being self-directed in your use of your tech.
At this point, Emily, I'd take learn, use, and not hate. I mean, that's like a big step, you know?
They're one in the same. Hate and love. Are they?
I'm not touching that one. I'm not.
You know what though? Having hate though, you can use that to say, like, look at the emotions. You know, that we've been talking about the emotions. Look at the emotions you're feeling. Recognize the relationship you have with this. Just like in a human relationship, you can work on what those emotions are. Find things and ways and methods. So yeah, I think there's actually, within that breakdown, there's a lot of methods, you know, taking your CRM out on a date and getting to know, you know, doing the icebreaker questions. And we can really do the relationship analogy in many, many ways. And
I want to watch that.
I just want to say,
I'm
100% serious. I'm not even being facetious or trying to make a joke. I work on this all the time. Like, I was getting really frustrated with something I was working on, and I, just like I do in my marriage, I was like, nothing I'm saying right now is really going to be helpful. I better walk away and come back in a minute when my emotions are under control.
Oh,
that is the best answer to Mandy's question.
The best answer I could have.
Absolutely. Good. How do you vet a tech, you know, to support this effort? You speed date your CRMs. Like, that is just like, that is so great, Emily. I just love it. And I just love to say, you reached out to me about your model, which I think is so great. Because you have one is part of, and I remember just feeling like, oh my gosh, somebody else is thinking about this, and being so relieved to just look at your methodology and talk through like mine and yours and find the differences. And I think that that's I'm so glad you're here to just say, like, we need models not just around how we implement or how we do vendor selection. What we need are models around how we shape our attitudes and ideas around this collectively. And I think that that's the other piece that we are not used to looking at, is that we think of performance as so individualized, and that doesn't work. You're taking, you know, in a CRM, you're collecting data that turns into information that then later turns into insight. And so if you don't have data you trust, you don't have insight or information that you trust either. And so you have to actually see this as a collective stream of data gathering. And, you know, our culture is so tuned into individualism that we just have a harder time when we don't get the direct benefit from it. And so I mean, I think that that's really important as well. And you have talked about that as well, both Najeet and but
I really am so heartened by the number of people I've met who have an approach, a philosophy that is so human centered in this work. And the thing that you just made me think of in terms of that collaborative of people is, it might be that nonprofit is better suited towards this conversation than for profit. And I don't have a lot of, I started in the private sector, but I avoided tech altogether. I remember we had an SAP system database that I was like, nope, nobody taught me about relational.
That was just a good call right there.
Yeah. So I avoided it in the private sector, but here's big grand assumptions about the private sector, that the connection to mission and reflection of your emotions and everything is not like supported at work to deal with your relationship with your technology. But at nonprofit, we're so into talking about this kind of stuff. Like, I think if you posited the idea of having a conversation about your technology wrapped in the framework of your organization's core values, that would be a conversation people might want to join in a way that maybe in a private sector it wouldn't be as supported. So the exciting thing, even though CRMs started as sales systems, I think our sector in being mission driven is actually probably our cultures are better seated and positioned to deal with the relationship part and then just advance everyone in their tech.
So that's a great point. And Barbara just asked another question about CRM selection. And thank you, Barbara, for saying tactical in there, because I think that I've got all sorts of strategic, and a lot of them can be tactical as well. Can we break that question into two parts and say, what do you need to do to be ready for a CRM experience? So there's that question, which I would love to speak to. Najeet, I'd love to hear, as a CRM builder, if you were recommending going out and vetting CRMs, you had to do that when you were putting your CRM together. I think I'd love to hear you take a swing at this question.
And again, I want to start by saying not one size fits all. There isn't a best CRM. There's a number of great CRMs and a number of less great ones. And I'll be honest about that. But there isn't, if you said to me, which is the best CRM for a nonprofit, I would ask about 47 other questions before I got that response, right? Are you looking for something that everyone in the organization can use the same piece of software? What's your budget? I'm just spitting off examples. What's the tech sophistication of your existing staff? What processes do you have in place? What are the can't live withouts? What is the onboarding time? What are you currently using? But I think there's one thing that undoubtedly should be guiding, and tactically, I also love that word, Tim, is how important is the user experience? And I don't mean for the donors, because that should always be great. I mean for my staff or our team. Do we want to have a database administrator? Do we want to, do we have the budget for that? Are we looking for hyper customization? Do we want more flexibility? These are the kinds of questions that we got to be asking. And the thing is, and I say this as a provider, you're never going to get all of it. No matter what you want or what you say, you're going to have to compromise on something. So figure out not just what's important, but in the order of importance, I think is really important, because you have to ultimately make choices and compromises. What's most important for your or our organization in this is making sure that things that we can't live without are on that list, and we kind of prioritize down. Again, I go back to that adage, the best CRM is the one you're going to use. So date a couple. To now, Emily, I'm stealing that for the rest of my life now, 100%.
So good.
And see which one you fall in love with ultimately. But I do want to underline the importance of the user's experience, because that's really, really, really important.
I'm going to take a stab on something I've done with multiple clients on this.
Don't you have a tool for this, Tim? Literally?
Yeah, I do. Well, I have. So that's a great question. I have a tool that helps assess 6 different areas, and one of them is solution fit. And solution is much broader than just CRM, because we need to start thinking about everything holistically. That said, CRM is the hardest piece of all of this. The big 3 pieces of software you're going to use are going to be your website, your CRM, and your general ledger. And those 3 things are the complications, all the time. With CRM,
I'm gonna add your donation forms tool, your public Outlook tool, because that may or may not be part of a CRM.
Exactly. Well, and that's all the middleware, right? That's where it just things blow up. And so what I've done in the past is to say, here are the big clicks to check into. So one is, what percent is major donors? The second is, how much are you trying to do on recurring donations? The next is, in recurring donations, is it important to do multiple designations at one time? That one right there is the mother of all complications. And so that's a big tick. Another one is reporting back on outcomes from grants. How much is grants a factor in this? And then what percent of your revenue is coming from online donations? That's kind of a big feature set. If you look at those and then you just put those on rows on a spreadsheet, and then you line up in columns a bunch of different CRMs, and you go down, and of course cost is on there as well. licensing structure? Is it a per user or is it per context? So you just gather all of that into a big spreadsheet. And somebody had asked about a volunteer that's willing to, that's a great job for a volunteer. Volunteer can go do that for 50 different CRMs and come back and you can start making a decision around that. But the real core value of that is the meetings that you have to discuss it, because that'll start to form your expectations. And that's what I would just say is, whatever you do on all of these decisions, start meeting regularly, and once a week, meet on this question and start hammering out the issues. If you do that, you'll start to create a culture of talking about it, and that will help a lot.
Yeah, and just to get really specific on the question, tips for someone without CRM experience choosing a CRM. So I think this is where we're talking about a couple of things. We're talking about what's traditionally called a CRM, or companies that claim to be a CRM, whatever that definition is, donor databases, like donor systems, even spreadsheets as a technology. So if you have experience with spreadsheets and using them like a database, or database experience, then if you haven't worked in a software that calls itself a CRM, you're still way ahead of the curve, because you understand some things about data modeling and database construction that could really help when choosing the right CRM. So to that point, I think if you don't have someone, and you're not going to get someone who has worked with CRMs to help you choose a CRM, then recognizing the ways that you can help someone on your team get experience with CRMs, talking to peers, going to another org that has one. There's like official online, YouTube or the official learning sites of any software,
or go to Pond. Like, just saying, like, Pond is great for that. Like, throw a project up that is like, I don't know what to do with my CRM, and then like people like me are on there saying, okay, this is where I intersect. So sorry to interrupt you, Emily.
No, that's okay. Yeah, like the idea is, if you feel like you don't have enough experience or knowledge to successfully make that choice, first of all, I would also just say, like, forgive yourself, dive in. You can't really go too wrong. And the way that we've been able to manage data migration from one system to another has come a long way in tech and in skills and in experience. So I'm not scared anymore the way I used to be of switching systems just based on data migration. But it's a challenge, but it can be a fun challenge. But we've been talking about the value of having skills and relationship in-house on these topics, on data and tech in general, and CRM specifically. So I'd say also, maybe before you go on the path of choosing your CRM, go on even a short path of developing skills and knowledge and experience in-house with CRMs, and then go on your CRM choice journey.
And can I just say one thing that I think is really important is, like, find a partner, a tech partner, or partners, if you're talking about Tim's middleware, that shares your values. I think ultimately, we are a mission-driven sector, and that can be shown in many ways. It can be shown through the leadership. It can be shown through things like being a B Corp, or whatever alternatives there are, or mechanisms to show that. But, I have a lot of faith in people. I run a technology company, but I have a lot of faith in people. And I think it's the people that make the tech. Look at their diversity, look at their values, look at these kinds of things, because ultimately, if those things matter to you and they feel and look and sound and speak to you, ultimately their tech is probably going to do the same. Not definitely, but probably. And I do think that's important, big or small.
And when you run into issues with a tech, you're partnering with that tech company, and their values are going to lead their solutions on getting you support. So that's also important to acknowledge. I would love to just plug both Emily's, mine, and Najeed's services around this. So Najeed doesn't just do Keela, which is an amazing CRM, but also check out Fundraising Kit, which is an AI around some of the parts of your system that you can get in and start looking at immediately. And that is not just for Keela, that is across platforms. That is one of the best middlewares. I am plugging it all the time because I think it gets you so much, and it does all the work. And that's the thing I'm looking for a lot is, what's doing all the work. And then I know Emily is doing a lot around how do you make tech work for you? Like, it's such a great idea, and Emily is so good at that. So I would say definitely check out what Emily's up to. I've got a free diagnostic. You can go on nowitmatters.com and look at my diagnostic, and it's free. And then I'll do a service where I'll help you read out kind of, here's where I think your organization is in general related to tech. And so I think those are the kinds of partnerships that's really, it doesn't have to be us. Find someone that can speak with expertise to this space and start developing that relationship as well. That seems really critical and important.
I'm just popping in from behind the production studio to thank you guys all for this wonderful discussion. And just a reminder, if you were able to join today, make sure you fill out our survey so you can get $50 in your Pond account. Thank you all.